now.
Welcome everybody.
Yes, thanks for joining. We're going to start with a little bit of a rousing video.
Wow, this is exciting.
Thanks to Sandra for this video.
Wow.
Welcome all. Now, I was really hoping that showed in full screen mode, did it? Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much to Sandra for putting that together. Welcome all. Thank you so much for coming to our town hall. I'm April Nichols with the Greater Andover Indivisible, represented here by several of my colleagues in other of our host organizations. And we are so glad to see so many of you here. We feel like now, today, these times, more than ever, it is really important for us all to come together to have this kind of an open and respectful and constructive dialogue with our elected officials. We really appreciate you all stepping up to be here as part of this event and this dialogue, and taking an active part in supporting democracy as we wish to see it. We are here being the democracy that we wish to be. And we feel very fortunate that we have, as our elected official here, Representative Seth Moulton, who welcomes this kind of dialogue. So together, we and Representative Moulton are being the democracy that we'd like to be. So we thank you so much for joining us. And Representative Moulton, we really thank you for being here to have this conversation with us. I'd like to share the screen again just to show a couple of quick slides as introduction. And apologies for that low-tech little transition there. We are all volunteers here. We all on this call, which are now numbering many over 100, are all the voice of the folks in the 6th district, which is a total of 39 towns across a broad and diverse constituency. And we are very proud to say that this event is brought to you by, hosted by, the 10 organizations that you see here. So a combination of Democratic town committees, indivisible groups, swing left groups, other progressive groups across the district. And also this event is sponsored by the organizations that you see here. So you saw 10 host organizations, and these are 32 of our 32 sponsors. So this is 31, representing 31 Democratic town committees. So, and also 11 progressive activist groups across the state. So we're very fortunate to have such an energized population here in CD6, and very glad to have you all come together to be part of this conversation. So our intention is that this agenda will last till 1 hour. We'll be done by 6:30. And the way that we'd like to use your time is after a few minutes, as long as Congressman Moulton would like to give us a sense of what life is like in Washington, D.C. and the issues that are top of mind. Then we'll have 2 sections to our moderated questions. Half the time, approximately 20 minutes, will be addressing the questions that you all have sent us in advance. And thank you so much for that. We had over 60 excellent questions, and Kath and Karen have boiled those down into a little less than a dozen of the most commonly asked and salient questions that will be presented by our first moderator, Eileen Duff. And then following that, the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be fielding questions from the chat. So we encourage you to put questions into the chat preceded by the word ask in capital letters before your question. So folks can know that this is a question you'd like to be asked, and it will be distinguished from other things that might be in the chat. So proceed your questions with the word ask in capital letters. And that section will be moderated by Lydia Edwards. So that's how we intend to spend the next minutes before 6:30. I'd like to then introduce our 2 moderators. We're very honored to have Lydia Edwards and Eileen Duff here as moderators. So the first section will be moderated by Eileen, who is a longtime advocate of this type of voice of the people here in the district, particularly the voice of the people in how government works, which is very much of interest to us. She lives on Cape Ann here in the district and is a member of the Governor's Council representing the Newburyport district. So thanks, Eileen, for joining us. And with that, next you'll see as moderator Lydia Edwards. So Lydia is currently a member of the Boston City Council, representing Charleston, East Boston, and North End. And she's worked as a public interest attorney at the Greater Boston Legal Services, and also served as the mayor in the mayor's office of housing stability. And that's of note because housing policy is one of the topics that many of you asked questions about. So you'll hopefully hear some of that in our discussion. So thanks to Lydia as well for moderating. If there are questions that we don't get to or that you think of following, then Congressman Moulton's office welcomes you to send them directly at this to this address, and we'll include this in the follow-on materials that we send you after this event. So the Congressman is on the line now, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
April,
wonderful.
You're doing a great job. You're doing
Thank
a great
you so
job.
much for joining us. We're glad to
I always
have you.
remind folks at town halls that I work for you, not the other way around. And in case that was ever in doubt, I was only just allowed to unmute. So you're definitely running the show. And I'm delighted to be here this evening, especially with two incredibly distinguished moderators. So Lydia and Eileen, thank you so much for joining me here tonight with all of you. We have a great crowd, I can see. If I'm looking down sometimes, just because I'm enjoying all the faces on the computer screen here. What I thought I would do for opening remarks is just talk about three things real quickly: why I'm here, what I'm doing, and a few words about why I think this this forum is so important. Does that sound good, April?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So first of all, why I'm here. I mean, many of you know me and you've seen me around, and you've heard a little bit about my story, but I think it's important to say that this is not really what I expected to be doing with my life. One of the people on tonight is my mom. I see here that she is at home. She just got knee surgery, and the doctors say she's doing very, very well, way above average for her exercises and recovery. So Mom, thanks for joining us from our old den at home in the house that my grandfather built in 1960, where my parents now live, and where I lived myself after we moved there when I was in college. But when I was growing up, this is not what I expected to be doing. I wasn't really involved in politics in school. I studied physics at Harvard, not political science. Which I like to remind people, for everybody in life who sees my resume and not my transcript, it makes me sound really smart to have a Harvard physics degree. We won't talk about all the grades, but I learned a lot. It's proving surprisingly relevant with all the discussion about science and all the important policy we're making involving science. It's kind of crazy that science is a controversial topic in the United States Congress these days, but we all know that it is. And so to be there as one of the few members with a science degree is great. But when I graduated from college and was looking for a way to give back, recognizing that I'd had this enormous opportunity to go to great public schools growing up, and then go to a college like Harvard, and I wanted to give something back to the country, I looked at different options all around. I didn't look at politics at all. That was definitely not what I was looking at. I looked at Peace Corps, teaching overseas, but ultimately had so much respect for these 18, 19-year-old kids who put their lives on the line for us in the United States military that I decided I would do my part there. I had no idea that 3 months after my graduation, September 11th would happen. And then I went through training thinking I had just missed the war in Afghanistan, and no idea that I'd end up in Iraq. Was in the first company of Marines into Baghdad just about a year later. The experience I had serving in this war that I strongly disagreed with and was outspoken in my criticisms about, really, I think, taught me some of the limits of leadership in Washington. And I saw a lot of mistakes made, candidly, a lot of lives lost because of people unwilling to be good leaders, courageous leaders, people who were willing to tell the truth in Washington. Now, even then, I didn't decide to run for Congress. I came back, I went to grad school. Like every aspiring Massachusetts politician, I took my first job in Dallas, Texas, after grad school. That's not usually where you move if you're
Después de que me gradué de la escuela secundaria.
But I called back, I think, to this sense of service that we need people who stand up, especially people who have different experiences, like the experience of being a Marine infantry officer on the ground, who've seen the consequences of failed leadership in Washington, to come to DC to be willing to change it. And so that's why I ran. And when I ran in 2014, I took on an incumbent. Eileen Duff was on the campaign trail with me. She was one of the only people who was even polite to me back then, because I was willing to challenge the status quo, to sort of challenge the Democratic establishment. But ultimately, I thought we needed better leadership. And you know, the people who were criticizing me for running in the first place were basically saying to me, Seth, do not participate in the democracy you just risked your life to defend. And of course, that's wrong. So I just worked hard, plugged away every day, and ended up winning that primary, and then won a tough general election. My predecessor won this seat by 1% in the previous election. This used to be a frontline district, which every year meant it was one of the top priorities for House Democrats to defend. So Democrats all across the country, donors, supporters, activists, they used to have to donate money just to hold on to this seat. We've totally turned that around with the help of people like you. We are now a seat that contributes to electing Democrats all over the country. With my Serve America organization in particular, we helped take back the House in 2018. In fact, half the candidates who flipped seats in 2018, when we finally regained the House majority, were Serve America candidates. And they're doing amazing things in Congress today. People like Alyssa Slotkin, Abigail Spanberger, Chrissy Houlihan, Mikey Sherrill, people who are holding on to these tough marginal seats, Lauren Underwood, Jahana Hayes, like these amazing leaders who didn't just come to Washington because they could win. They came to Washington to make a difference. And their names you recognize because in a few short years, they have made a difference. They are having an impact on Capitol Hill, and they're holding on to this majority that is so critical we keep in the 2022 midterms. So that's kind of how I got here. But I think it's also important to say that, you know, I've got 2 kids roaming around somewhere here. Well, one of them's not roaming around because she's 3 months, and a lovely wife. And, you know, that's a very grounding experience, obviously, to have a young family and recognize that the work that you're doing every day is not just about what's good for this country today. It's about investing in the future, investing in our children, making sure that they have a future to be hopeful and excited about. There's a lot of reason to be concerned, to put it mildly, cynical even, about politics today, about the state of things in Washington. I hear that all the time. I experience it firsthand. And I'm committed to making sure that we change that when Emmy is old enough to understand what's going on in Washington, which I'm kind of grateful for the fact that she doesn't fully understand. I don't have to explain Trump to her because she's so young. But when she's old enough to understand this and begin explaining it to her younger sister, that we have a lot of reason to be optimistic about the future, that we are thinking about investing in their lives, not just our own. And so to that end, I think it's important when you're in Washington to find things to focus on where you can really make progress. And that's why
Es importante en Washington hacer progreso.
Because there was momentum on that. I now sit on the board of one of the top gun reform action groups in the country that's really trying to turn the conversation. I've been endorsed by all the major gun reform groups, and it's a place where I have some credibility because of my experience serving in the Marines. And that's a place where I've been able to have great impact in the past. And now at the moment, the Biden administration is talking about doing work on guns, but what they're really focused on at the moment is infrastructure. And so I was up till 5 a.m. last night working on a markup of the transportation and infrastructure bill because I'm a member of the committee and the leading advocate right now in Congress for high-speed rail, which is a key priority of the Sunrise Movement. And and other great groups around the country. We're going to do an event with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez next week to talk about the impact of the bill that we have, the legislation that I've put forward in Congress, and the components of that are included in the big president's jobs bill that is part of what we were working on to the wee hours of the morning. So we're making a lot of progress on transportation and infrastructure. I also sit on the House Armed Services Committee, big surprise, given my background. And there, I recently co-chaired the bipartisan Future of Defense Task Force, where a key conclusion was that we can't keep doing what we're doing. But if we do invest in the future, not only to meet the rising threats that are coming from different parts of the world and in different ways than we anticipated, we can also save a lot of money because a lot of these new technologies are much less expensive than the big, old, huge, heavy defense systems that we've had in the past. And that enables us to invest in other things, invest in education and basic scientific research, which is critical to our national security, including, but in addition, just critical to our economic security. Investing in diplomacy. A huge part of our Future Defense Task Force report was about how we have to form new alliances and establish new limits on the use of these new technologies in warfare. Nobody is talking about that enough. Even the Biden administration, now that we have a Democrat in the White House, they're not talking about this enough. And so it's something that I'm pushing them on every single day. Just this morning, we had a hearing on Strategic Forces Subcommittee where I was pressing the deputy secretary about, if you're going to buy a new weapon system, you better have an idea of how you're using it first. She didn't give me an adequate answer. And I said, look, you need to have this answer. I mean, I'm friendly to the Biden administration, but I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on this because we should not be spending taxpayer dollars on things that we don't need. So that's a little bit of a flavor of some of the big legislative priorities that we have in Washington. And then something I've been working on a lot because it's a place where we have been able to make bipartisan progress despite all the division in Washington is mental health. Mental health is something that's very personal to me. I became the first presidential candidate in history to share my own story of dealing with mental health when I talked about post-traumatic stress coming back from Iraq. I didn't know if it might end my career when I shared that story, but instead the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and it's given me a platform to work on major mental health issues all across the country. The fact that we are all next year going to have a 3-digit number where anyone in America, no matter what phone you have, landline, cell phone, no matter what carrier, everyone in America will be able to dial 3 digits to immediately speak to a mental health counselor. That's my bill that I co-authored with a Republican veteran. And let me tell you, it took a lot of work, but we were able to get it through both houses of Congress onto the president's desk, and that crazy idiot actually signed it. That's not easy to do. That's not easy to get legislation through in such a divided Washington, especially when we had the previous president. But we did it. It's going to save thousands and thousands of lives every single year because people are going to know how to get help when they need it or when a loved one needs it. And that's an example of the kind of work that we can get done despite the division in Washington today. So finally, where do all of you come in? Well, look, I held more town halls than any other Democrat in the House or Senate in my first term, just because I know how important this is. I work for you. I represent you. I can't do that if I don't hear from you and understand your perspectives and your views. My job is to represent everyone in the district, whether they voted for me or not, whether they voted for someone else or didn't vote at all, no matter what their position is on a particular issue. I take that responsibility seriously, and it's why it's so important that so many of you are here tonight. Many of you are people who have been involved in these campaigns and working to not only get me reelected, but to ensure that this seat stays safely in Democratic hands so that we can help expand the Democratic majority all across the country. And for all that work, I have to thank you. There are a lot of Democrats all over America who are grateful for our district and the ways that we are able to contribute to their success. Because just imagine how bad things would be if they were still in the Republican hands today. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens, we win the majority, we win the White House because of hard work on the ground by people like you. So thank you for all that you do, for your activism, your volunteerism, your involvement. You're simply showing up to forums like this that are so critical, as April said, for our democracy. So with that, let me turn it over to you, and we'll get into the questions, and I look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for those comments. And we were noticing that you actually touched on several of the topics that folks have asked questions about. So that's just a sign that you're pretty good at your job, I think. And we would like to now bring Eileen Duff to the fore to ask a few of the questions that have been prepared in advance. Are you ready, Eileen?
Thank, yeah,
Great.
I'm ready. I do want to just say one quick thing to folks. I'm not sure if people really understand the impact that Congressman Moulton had on getting the House, getting the Serve America PAC, the impact they had. It was really tremendous and not really spoken about as much as I think it should be. The other thing is, if you know the history of this district, it hasn't been held by Democrats all the time, and it is a very vulnerable district. And so to his point, it's very important that, you know, we hold the fort, as we would say up in Gloucester, and keep CD6 afloat. So with that, Congressman Moulton, can you tell us about the Olin Superfund site cleanup project?
Yes, absolutely. So, look, we've been working since literally my first day in office to get this cleanup process unstuck. It's obviously something that's been going on for a very, very long time, and long before my tenure in this seat. Let me just tell you some of the things we've done. Our first step was to get it listed as a priority project by the EPA. So that took some work, some sort of advocacy behind the scenes with the Environmental Protection Agency to get them to recognize how important this is and to make it a priority, because it's obviously a priority for our community. More recently, the EPA has approved a final decision on a cleanup plan for the site. The cleanup is expected to cost about $48 million. That's a lot of money. I don't need to tell you that. So we're going to continue to press on the EPA until this is done, until the site has been put back to productive use. And, you know, what looks like is a conversation that we have to, you know, that has to be driven by local Wilmington residents themselves, as they certainly have the most skin in the game for how that site is used in the future. So a lot of this work has been, you know, behind the scenes, because it's working through the government bureaucracy to get the EPA to prioritize this, to get all the different people involved to do their job. And it's a little bit shocking how long this has taken, how slow the process is, but I'm glad to see it's moving forward now.
Terrific, thank you. So the next question I have for you is I think on everybody's mind, and it's about affordable housing. Affordable housing is desperately needed throughout CD6, especially for people who have been displaced when their rental units have been converted into condominiums. Can we get federal funding to aid cities like Haverhill, Lawrence, Beverly, Gloucester, Salem, and Burlington to upgrade their housing stocks?
Yes, we can, and we've been very successful at getting some federal funding in Lynn, for example. There's a great new housing development on Washington Street that's really a product of the task force that I put together in Lynn, that for the first time brought together local city, state, and federal officials to all sit down at the same table and have a real open dialogue about
con oficiales federales para resolver este problema que hemos puesto sobre la mesa. Hay mucho dinero.
Public sector and the private sector is dramatically improving the housing stock in that city, just as an example. But I choose Lynn because it's a good example of why solving the housing crisis is not just about investing in housing, although obviously that's a critical component. Underlying all of this is transportation, because if you want to have housing, the fundamental driver of housing access is how you're able to get there. And the problem in Boston, the Boston area writ large right now, is that we have a booming economy. but we have very difficult access to housing, even though there is housing around the Commonwealth. And there are places like the city of Lynn, like the cities that you have mentioned in the list here, that have the potential to grow and have the potential to offer more affordable housing to people who want to work all around the area. But the problem is, if you can't get easily from your housing to your job and back again, then it doesn't work. And that's fundamentally one of the reasons I'm so passionate about transportation, improving transportation around the Commonwealth and around Massachusetts. So, and around the country. So let me give you a couple examples of why this matters so much. I mean, the top, literally, neighborhood for job growth in the entire New England region right now is the South Boston waterfront. That's where it's like a new building going up every week, tons of startups, firms are moving there. There are a lot of job opportunities. And some of those jobs are very high end. Some of those jobs are much lower on the pay scale as well, just to provide all the support services for these businesses, these offices. But it's very difficult to get from the North Shore, from a place like Burlington, west of the city, from a place like Haverhill or Lawrence, cities that I don't represent but are just outside my district. It's very hard to get there, get to the South Boston waterfront from these gateway cities. I mean, Lynn has a couple of different transportation and transit options, and yet it takes a lot longer to get from North Station over to the South Boston waterfront than it does to go all the way from Lynn into the city. And if you think about it, those of you who've been spending any time in New York and see how Brooklyn is thriving right across the river from Manhattan, Lynn is the same distance from downtown Boston as Brooklyn is from Manhattan. But think about the difference in transit access. Brooklyn has multiple subway lines with service every few minutes going 24 hours a day. Lynn has one commuter train every hour in the middle of the day, and that's the best we can do. Imagine how much Lynn would grow and how many housing opportunities it could provide if you have a good housing policy paired with transportation access to actually get people to the city. So this is why I've been an advocate for the North-South Rail Link, which will enable a regional rail system, all electrified, subway-like frequency all around the Commonwealth, so that people can take the train with ease. And you don't have to be someone who uses the train because it's the only option. Everyone will prefer the train because it's a better option. It's a faster option than driving. Imagine being able to live in Lynn or Haverhill or Lawrence and get to downtown Boston in 30 or fewer minutes. But not only that, connect through a central station downtown to any other area around the Commonwealth. That's the kind of transportation access that we need for job access, for housing access. And that's why this is so important. So Eileen's interrupting me because I get very passionate about this, and there's a lot more that I could say. And I know we want to get on to other questions, but if you want me to go into this in any more detail, happy to do so. We're debating this literally right now with the president's jobs plan, which is grounded in transportation and infrastructure, where we're talking about these investments and how much we're going to invest in the future versus just build more highways and fill potholes in existing roads, which is what the Republicans want to do. We have an opportunity to be transformative here in access to jobs, access to housing, by being transformative in transportation. And I'm pushing the administration with every ounce that I've got to make sure that we make those choices.
That you're singing to my ears, because I really believe this so much. Let them know that public transportation isn't about making money. It's about moving people. And
it's crazy. I mean, I got in this debate last night at some point. I don't know when it was, what hour of the morning, with a Republican who said, I don't know if these Amtrak trains are making money. Well, excuse me, are you asking if the federal highway system is making money? Because I can guarantee you it's not. We commissioned a study from the Harvard Kennedy School to look at this, and they determined that the annual cost every single year to Massachusetts residents for driving around the Commonwealth is a subsidy of $64 billion. So you hear Governor Baker always complain about how You know, if you get that ticket on the commuter rail, or a ticket on the subway, part of that is subsidized by the Massachusetts taxpayer. Well, it turns out we're subsidizing the hell out of driving, and $64 billion a year is paid by everyone, even those who don't own a car, because it's going to things like emergency services, because so many people die on our roads. It's so unsafe. To state police salaries, which we know are not exactly, it's not exactly a well-run organization, but I mean, half the state police wouldn't even have to exist if we didn't have so much dependency on driving all around the Commonwealth. It's going to things like carbon pollution and all the consequences of that, asthma, land use. One high-speed rail line has the capacity of 6 to 8, some people say 10 to 12 highway lanes. Think about the difference in land use there and the impact on our environment. So there are so many implications of how we make decisions about transportation. And we've been doing a lot of things wrong in America. So we've got to really turn it around.
Thank you. I don't mean to take you off track with this, but
Is that a pun? Take me off track?
Yes, it was. Actually, the ROI is about moving the people. Anyway, next question is the plight of the Postal Service has been very well documented, and the appointment of the Trump loyalist DeJoy was designed to stop or at least hamper American people in their ability to vote by mail, which was critical in the last cycle. And it also to cripple the service's ability to fulfill its constitutional mandate. Congress has taken no steps to address the real unsustainable burdens imposed on the Postal Service under the 2006 Postal Accountability and Reorganization Act. It's the people's post office. We fly the flag there every day. What are your plans and or ideas to help save the Postal Service from complete privatization? Because that seems to be the road that some folks want it to go down.
Okay, so the founding fathers had a lot of work to do when setting up this country, right? And there are a lot of different things that they could have focused on in those very early days. One of the things they chose to focus on was the Postal Service, and that's because it's a public service. And we've known that for a long time. The founding fathers didn't say, how can we, as we're setting up this country, how can we set up a profit-making business to deliver mail? That should be a real priority of ours. No, they didn't say that. They said, Postal Service is a public service that is critical to a democracy. It's critical to our economy every single day. And so we've got to make sure that service comes first, that the public comes first. That should be the priority. Now, look, I am all for making the Postal Service more efficient because I want your taxpayer dollars to be well used. I don't want to see the Postal Service, the Department of Defense, the Department of Education, anybody wasting your taxpayer dollars. So if there are ways to deliver mail more efficiently, I'm all for it. What Postmaster DeJoy is doing is the exact opposite. He's working on delivering mail less efficiently. He is responsible for the fact that it takes forever to get checks in the mail today. I mean, we experience this at home all the time. We're trying to, I mean, literally just last week, we were waiting for a check to arrive in the mail. I even got an email from the Postal Service that said it was going to be delivered on Thursday or Friday. It didn't show up till Monday. Now there are people who want to cut back service so we don't even get mail delivered 6 days a week. So we've got to get back to our core principles here and recognize what our priorities are. I know the Biden administration would love to get rid of this guy through some intricacies with the way the Postal Board is set up that I'm not going to bore you with right now. They can't just fire him. I wish they could, but I don't need to make the case to you that the postal the service at the USPS has gotten worse over the last year because I think we've all experienced it, and it's a real problem, and it's kind of pathetic that we're the most wealthy, powerful nation in the world, and yet we can't even get people mail. Eileen, I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm tell me, because I mean that's how I feel about it. It's kind of ridiculous.
No, I think you're really in the camp that the mindset that folks are in. And I guess I want to move on to other questions, but people are really looking for, you're a great leader and for leadership in solutions to this. I'm somebody who has lived on 3 different continents in many developing countries throughout my life. I've traveled and stuff. And I tell people, you know, the US Postal Service is, before Mr. DeJoy was actually extraordinary. When you think about the value, it was quite extraordinary. You know, when years ago, when I was in Southeast Asia, you had to bring your own glue to the post office to put your stamp on, and then you had to make sure they franked it so they didn't peel it off and sell it again. So anyone that wants to complain about the post office, I'm like a commercial for them. Anyway,
I don't want to. I don't want to get off track here to overuse a bad pun, but one of the reasons why mail service was actually much better 50 years ago is that mail was carried on regular passenger trains, and it was a much more efficient way to deliver mail and to get it quickly across the country than putting it in trucks or planes. So there's like a lot of fun, there's a lot of history here that's fascinating, and high-speed rail service would be incredible for improving our mail service and making it more efficient as well, making by the way, have a way smaller carbon input. I mean, the fact that so many of our letters have to go 30,000 feet up in the air and back down to get to their destination has a massive impact on our environment. So I won't digress into that. There are a lot of reforms that should be made. But one other that we were literally just discussing last night were the Postal Service trucks. We were at home the other day and we heard this incredibly noisy vehicle go by, and Liz was like, what is that? And I looked outside and it was a Postal Service truck, because these trucks haven't been upgraded. So we're trying to get the Postal Service to convert to all electric vehicles for the final mile delivery of mail. I mean, imagine if your mail was picked up by an electric vehicle of the post office. It went onto an all-electric high-speed train and was delivered at the other end by a postal carrier or someone who got out of an electric vehicle. I mean, this could be a totally carbon-free transportation system. It's very far from that today. Yeah. So in addition to simply restoring service, there are a lot of ways that we can invest in the Postal Service to make it much better.
Okay. To keep it moving, you're a leader in Congress. You're a decorated war veteran. We thank you so much for your service. The next question is, how can we weed out those members of Congress and the active military, veterans, and police who still support this big lie and extremist beliefs and hold them accountable? And what connection do you see in the fact that Fox News is aired incessantly in public places and on military bases?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to take their power away, to sort of make them powerless. And this is something that I've been working on since January 6th in Washington. I will tell you that there is some debate in the Democratic Party about how serious we should be when it comes to the accountability of our colleagues. And there are a lot of fellow Democrats who just say, look, we've got to keep working with these folks. And I understand they have an argument there. My view, and I made this very clear to my team, is that we're going to do everything we can to not work with seditionist Republicans, because I don't want to give them any power. I don't want to give them any credibility. Sometimes they go back to their districts and like to say, I'm on this bipartisan bill. I'm working across the aisle to get things done. Well, I'm not going to give them that opportunity if I can find another Republican to work with to get legislation passed. So we have some examples of that where we had a Republican co-sponsor for a bill that hasn't gotten through Congress yet, so we have to reintroduce it for this Congress, but we're reintroducing it with a different Republican because sadly, that colleague of mine chose to vote against the will of the American people. And I do believe that they should be held accountable for that. So accountability is critical. Actually, just the last hour I was in Washington last, myself and Anna Eshoo, representative from California, we both got up and we did this sort of formal renouncement on the floor of the House of Representatives, taking ourselves off a bill that we had co-sponsored. It was a good piece of legislation, but it was authored by a seditionist Republican, and we both said we're not going to be a part of that. So that's one thing we're doing. The FBI has arrested, I think, 465 people so far, including at least 50 active duty military or veterans. I mean, the veterans and military of any active duty military are actually a small percentage of the rioters. But the fact that there are any of them there is incredibly disturbing and offensive, especially to a veteran like myself.
Right.
These are traitors to our country. Let's not mince words. They are traitors to our country. They have violated the oath that they took. I mean, anyone who participated in that riot, who stormed the halls of democracy, is a traitor to the United States of America. But if you've actually taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, that makes it so many times worse. And so they have to be held accountable. One of the things that is critical to accountability is making sure that the tech companies, many of which the social media companies enabled all these people to get together, to organize online and come together into this vicious assault on our democracy, they have to be held accountable. I'm one of the members of the antitrust caucus in Congress because I think these tech companies have gotten too big. They have too much power over our lives. A lot of people are afraid of them. I'm not. I'm not afraid to stand up to them and say, we need to put some restrictions on what you're doing. We need to have some regulation, and it needs to be driven by elected officials who are accountable to all of you, to the people who elect us. We shouldn't have people in a dark room in the back of Facebook making these decisions. We should have regulations driven by the public sphere. That's the way things work in this country. The fact that the European Union is ahead of us on social media regulation just shows how far behind we are. We should be leading on this. These are American companies that dominate the social media all over the world. We should be leading on regulating them and making sure that they are abiding by our laws and our principles, our basic principles of democracy. I think that is it is absolutely critical. And so there's a lot of work to do that we need to make sure we hold people accountable. But those are some examples of sort of the different levels at which we're working to make that happen.
All right, thank you, Congressman. I think we're gonna switch over to the most fabulous Lydia Edwards.
Hey, Lydia.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I am joining you from Boston in C7, which is Congresswoman Ayanna Presley's district. So I'm just honored to be here tonight, your colleague. I'm sure she says hello. And I also just wanted to say thank you for your service. I am an Air Force brat. My mother served in the Air Force for 23 years. I grew up on various military bases around the world. And I just wanted to acknowledge your service and also just give a shout out to a lot of the military families out there. So,
well, thank you. And thank you to your mother. I mean, I think it should go without saying, but look, you make sacrifices to serve in the military. You especially make sacrifices if you're a woman who served in the military, especially back when it was not nearly as common as it is today for women to serve. So I'm sure that wasn't easy, and we're all grateful for her service.
Oh, thank you so
and
much.
To your family for supporting her.
Of course. Not much choice in it, but definitely.
Fair.
I was born on the military base, but anyway, so getting to some really interesting questions. There's some themes that came up in the prior set from Eileen, and I just want to touch on some of them. So transportation is a big deal, and as you noted, being able to move around is about literally your ability to move from one economic stratosphere to another. So tell us your thoughts. One of the questions that came in about the fair share tax amendment. That is hopefully going to be on the ballot, and that ballot, or that would be the millionaire's tax is called, but essentially would be a tax that would allow for certain funds or those tax funds to go to the for education and transportation infrastructure. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I think it is absurd that the wealthiest people in America pay the lowest percentage of taxes. I mean, that's just fundamentally unfair. I mean, how is it that a corporation like Amazon pays nothing in taxes? I mean, how many people on the Zoom tonight, let me make sure I can see people here. Raise your hand if you paid nothing in federal taxes last year. Okay, and yet Amazon paid nothing in federal taxes. And now we learn through a ProPublica investigation that was just recently published that Jeff Bezos, the billionaire who's profiting off of all the pandemic profits of Amazon, paid nothing in federal taxes. I mean, I'm sorry, like, don't give me any sort of like a legal economic explanation for how he was able to do this. And maybe he somehow was able to actually do it legally under the law. The point is, it doesn't meet the basic premise of common sense. It doesn't meet the basic common sense test. So we have to change our tax code. We have to hold people accountable. Everybody should pay a fair share. And I can't personally think of a better thing other than maybe education for this to go to, because as you said, Lydia, we've got to address the fundamental drivers of inequality, one of which is access to transportation because it drives access to housing and access to jobs. Another of which is education. You know, there's no better, I mean, I make this case on the Armed Services Committee. There's no better investment we can make in our national security than the education of our youth. That's how we develop all the most sophisticated technologies of the future to defend our country if we have really smart kids who are growing up, right? And so we've got to invest in education. And do I think that the billionaires should be paying their fair share? Hell yeah. Yeah, they should. So we need to change our tax code, and it should happen at the federal level. It can also start right here in Massachusetts.
Oh, so that's a yes then for the fair share tax amendment, right?
Yeah, no, I'm supportive of it, but I don't think it goes far enough. Like, I think we need to do more. And the fair share tax amendment is not going to make Jeff Bezos pay his federal income tax. Okay,
True.
so like we have to do a lot more.
So, because I think I have like 20 questions from the chat, so I'm going to kind of go through and group them a little bit. There's a theme that ran through several of the questions about bipartisanship, and that there's a real concern that it is dead, and that there's just no way that we're going to come back together. And then when we do come back together, the compromise is that even happening anymore. The concerns about this, specifically that theme of bipartisanship, deal with the For the People Act, right? And the ability for us to protect the very fundamental right to be able to access and vote. The other concerns that it's going to attack is honestly the truth about the bipartisan commission for January 6th. And then also just really in general, being able to look at the Thrive Act and being able to just get things done that are going to help us as a community, as a country, get back on our feet. So let's just talk about bipartisanship. Is it dead? And then let's talk about the For the People Act and how are you going to get things done?
Okay, so and I'm going to try to pick up the speed here because I just looked at the clock and I realized the time is flying by. So you're right. Okay, look, bipartisanship is not dead. I mean, that's how I was able to get this this mental health hotline bill through, because we were able to work in bipartisan way, not just in the House where we authored the bill, but in the Senate and even with the White House to get it signed by the president when it crossed his desk. So bipartisanship is not dead, but we've got to have standards here, folks. We've got to have standards, and that's why I do everything I can to work with Republicans who actually upheld the principles of our democracy when it came to certifying the election results on January 6th versus those who voted to undermine the people's will, your will. So, yes, bipartisanship is working. I'm someone who's proud of being able to show bipartisan results. I don't just talk about it. I can show you how we've been able to get it done, but we've got to have standards. The For the People Act will make this all better and easier because it's basically just restoring faith in democracy. And there was an interesting New Yorker article that came out that disclosed some conversations that Mitch McConnell was having with his staff and with his advisors on this. And by the way, they said that all these conservatives across the country like the For the People Act too, because it's kind of hard to argue with. And yet Republicans like Mitch McConnell know that it will undermine their source of power from people like the Koch brothers, who have these massive amounts of money to finance their crooked politics. And so we've got to pass this. Joe Manchin is completely off his rocker. I mean, look, I know the guy is old and out of touch, but he's out of touch even with the history of the filibuster, because it was not intended by the founding fathers to be a legislative tool. It was, if you take the time, I mean, literally take 15 minutes tonight, read the history of this. He's got it all wrong. So this idea that this is some principle of bipartisanship just doesn't line up with truth and reality. And by the way, I just realized that part of the question earlier about extremism and the January 6th attacks was about the influence of Fox News, and I didn't address that. Fox News is a huge influence here. I mean, one of the rioters on January 6th is literally using Fox News as his legal defense, saying that he had Fox-itis, that he was infected by Fox News. And that's what, so when the people here who are attacking our democracy are literally blaming Fox News themselves, yes, it's a big part of the problem. It absolutely is.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and one of the questions wanted to specifically talk about two things: disinformation and how do we counter that, but then how do we counter the the pushback from a lot of people for dealing with real information, tough information, critical race theory, dealing with anti-racism. So how do you balance both at the level and as a congressman?
Well, first of all, disinformation is clearly a driver of a lot of the problems here, including the divisiveness in our politics, because everybody has their own little world that they inhabit on social media. Some of those worlds are just not true, but they get their beliefs reinforced. And this is one of the reasons why social media regulation matters. I'm not sitting here telling you that I have all the perfect answers for how we reduce disinformation on the internet, but I can certainly sit here and tell you it's something that we should address. It's something that we need to tackle. It's something that young people in Congress, by the way, are willing to take on because we understand social media. It's a part of our lives. We've grown up with it. So frankly, a lot of the leaders in Congress right now are reticent to touch it. That's one of the reasons why we haven't addressed it. That's one of the reasons why I'm a part of this antitrust caucus and other groups that are working to address and regulate social media, because it clearly needs to be done. Now, what about critical race theory, for example? I was on a hearing recently where, actually, no, better example is this. I was recently forwarded a letter that a colleague of mine in the House Armed Services Committee wrote to the Commandant of West Point, saying that he was disturbed and appalled that the head of West Point was allowing critical race theory to be taught on campus. As soon as I saw that letter, I said, no, I'm not just going to complain about this. I'm going to write my own letter. And I wrote to the head of West Point, the general in charge, and I said, let's remember the fundamental principles of our democracy. I can make a case to you for why we should not have racism in our military and why we need to address that. Clearly, you already understand that, which is why you're having these discussions and you're teaching a critical race theory at West Point, and you're having a debate about these things with the future leaders of our military. But let's also just remember the fundamental principles of our democracy, which is that we are a land of the free exchange of ideas, freedom of speech, right? First Amendment. So the fact that a colleague of mine, a member of Congress, was writing to West Point and saying, you should not teach this, that's censorship. That kind of leadership from Congress belongs in communist China, not here at home in America. So it is incredible how often this comes up in Congress, where Republicans will specifically attack critical race theory and other anti-racist teachings and say we shouldn't be teaching of that. And I think it's important for Democrats to not only push back about why racism is a problem and why we need to address it, but also just to come back to the fundamental principles of our country, which is that we do not censor ideas. We do not censor debate. We have it because that's critical to any democracy.
We have about 2 more minutes, so I'm going to just ask you very quickly. Some questions came in about climate change and dealing with that. Speaking of the future, speaking of sunrise that came up earlier, speaking of being a younger person in Congress. So could you name 3 concrete things you're doing to combat climate change?
Absolutely. So first of all, as one of the first co-sponsors of the Green New Deal, because we have to address climate change in a major way. And I've also been working to make sure we craft the Green New Deal in a way that addresses climate change most effectively. And I've laid out my 3 priorities for doing this. 1, carbon-free energy for the developed world. 2, carbon-free energy for the developing world, because it's not enough just for us to stop producing pollution here. We've got to make sure the developing world has the technologies and the access to technology to make sure that they are not creating carbon pollution as well. And then 3rd, decarbonization, which is something that is sometimes
En tercer lugar, la descarbonización.
putting carbon in the atmosphere today, it would not be good enough. We have to literally be able to take carbon out of the atmosphere because there's too much in there today. That's something that's uncomfortable for some people to talk about. It's critical. And so I've been really excited to work with a lot of local groups, including Climate Change Action and others who are working to make sure we do these things. I'm going to put that all in one category. The second thing is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the United States is our transportation sector. That's why I'm fighting so hard for high-speed rail, because look, we can convert to electric vehicles. That's good. It's not bad, but it actually will increase congestion most likely. It'll actually encourage more people to drive. The best way that we can reduce our carbon footprint is to give people a truly viable transportation alternative. And the answer to that is completely carbon-free high-speed rail. We're literally at time, so I don't have time to go into it in detail, but please follow this debate, follow the work that we're doing, follow the bill introduction that we're doing next week with Representative Ocasio-Cortez and others, because this is so critical to investing in the future of our transportation. And then the third thing is we have to invest in the basic scientific research that drives all these innovations, because America should be the leader in these technologies. We should be the ones with green jobs. When we have people buy solar cells, when we have people buy electric vehicles, those components, those technologies should all be developed here in America. Those should be American jobs. There's no reason why having a Green New Deal, why having a green future needs to cost American jobs, needs to cost our economy. It should grow our economy. And that's something that we can achieve if we truly invest in the future.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We're over time. There's so many good questions about global.
We can go a
policy,
few more minutes if you, I don't know what you've got going. We can go a few more minutes.
Question I need to know, because I'm suffering from this, and so I'll be asking this to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Sorry, everyone. Student debt. Let's tell me what you're gonna do about.
Well, first of all, personal experience for me, so we can bond over that. Yes, yes, student debt is very real. And again, it's something that's holding back our economy. So it's not just about fairness. It's not just about ensuring that we're investing in our future. We want people to get an education. We want people to be inspired to get an education. So we've got to tackle student debt. One thing that I think is critical, is often controversial in this debate, is that you can't just make debt sort of free, because then colleges will issue even more of it. Right? Because the college can basically just raise the cost of tuition and say, it doesn't matter how high tuition is, because we can give people all the loans they need, then it's going to make the situation worse, which is one of the things that makes this so complicated. We should bring down interest rates on existing debt. We should make sure that colleges fundamentally have restrictions on their ability to raise the cost of tuition, because if we just make loans more available, as has basically happened in the last 20 years, the result is going to be rising costs of tuition, and that's the fundamental driver. So if these colleges and universities across the country are going to have access to all sorts of federal resources, federal fundings, including access for their students to get federal loans, then we should have a say in the cost of tuition.
Oh, I'm 100% excited about your thoughts. And we can immediately start with lowering the interest rate. I think that would be great, and debate about how much is hopefully forgiven.
Like, why if you get a loan to get a car, okay, like to contribute to climate pollution, the carbon pollution, is your interest rate lower than if you take a loan to invest in your education? Like, that's crazy.
Right. Well, I'm getting the proverbial hook
Okay.
announcement via text message and some. But this is so great. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think we're going to turn it over for folks to unmute. I'm going to just check and confirm, but I think
Yes.
that's.
So I just want to say thanks to everyone. And this is such a great illustration of good questions, good listener, good answers, good dialogue, to be continued. So
Absolutely.
this is just to start. May we please unmute at all and give it a round of applause. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Seth.
Hey, round of applause to all of you. You're the ones who make this happen. And not just April, you've done an incredible job, and all the groups who are behind this, and to our moderators, Lydia and Eileen, thank you so much for your service, for being willing to do me the favor of coming here tonight. But to everybody here, thank you for participating. We will do a lot more of this. Don't worry. I have that record of most town halls. I want to keep it up. So we'll do a lot of this. Can't wait to be doing it in person, but we'll make sure virtual opportunities continue to be available as well. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Keep competing for the top.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.